Okay, now that we got the strip wood all grained up and all the fuzzies taken off with the Scotch-Brite, the next thing we have to do is cut it into the frame members here. I have a drawing that I made that shows the frame pieces we'll be making right here on the top. This drawing you can download and then use the scale here to check to make sure that the drawing is to full scale. That's just an inch scale. So the first thing we're going to do is cut these members here. Now if you're making just a few of these cars, you can just take the measurements and build the frames right on top of the drawing here. That's one way of doing it. If you're making a lot of cars, I would suggest making jigs. I like making a lot of jigs for everything. This is the first jig I made for the Creek hopper cars. You can see the top shape here of the frame. I made this jig by building one half of the outside frame, and then I flipped it over. I built one half and glued in all these little pieces here to hold the members, and I flipped it over and glued these in around the other half, and then I just finished the whole frame inside there. Then I had a jig that I could build into, and then I just popped the frame member out. And I used this for several cars until I decided to try something different, and I came up with this jig here. This I actually designed on a 3D CAD system and had Shapeways make it. These little holes you see here, they're holes that allow glue to ooze out of the joints and not glue the part to the jig. And then this too, I can just bend and pop out the part when it's finished. There's a little space around every one of these holes to allow the glue to come out the sides if it has to, or out the top and bottom. So this one actually works pretty good. And then I thought, well, if I can make a jig to make the frame members, I could also make a jig to cut all the pieces. So this jig here, you'd slide in pieces of strip wood into it, bottom it out, cut it off at the stop, and then this is the top member that would go into this jig. And you would just keep working your way down through all these pieces. Some of these are at angles, and it would make all the pieces for this one. I also did the same for the end of the car. Made a cutting jig for that one as well. And I really like using these. I had some things along the way that I had to solve. I had some of these, I made the slots a little bit, the tolerance is too tight, and I had to go and scrape some of them out a little bit. But otherwise, if I were to do it again, I could probably get it first try. But that's kind of an expensive way to go if you're making just a few of them. And those jigs would probably cost, you can get $50 or more. I think this pile was $70. I had a few other ones made too, but because it's all about material, like this hole I put in here, significantly actually dropped the price on this jig here. So, but either way, jigs can be made. Here's a jig, an assembly jig for making the frame so the car is square. When you get all the frame made, I build the car on top of this here to keep it square. I've got jigs for drilling holes. I've got jigs for centering parts. I've got jigs for cutting the lengths of those metal rods. They're all marked on this kind of what we call a story stick. So I was just making jigs if you're making more than one of these things, or one of anything. And sometimes I even make jigs for one thing just to hold a part in the correct spot. Alright, so let's get cutting some parts out here. I'm going to use my jigs, but you can go ahead and cut yours out if you're making one of these. Right on the paper, or take these measurements I have here. The measurements are in fractions of an inch, they're not scale, so if you have a dial caliper and you know how to use it, you got some measurements here to go by and check yours against the drawing. So I'm going to grab my jig here, and I won't cut all these on camera because it takes some time, but I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of these here. See how easy that works? There we go. There's two top frames. It's the rail that goes across here. When I get the rest of them made, I'll just pop these all in this jig right there. Start gluing it together. At this point, when you get all these parts cut out, it's a good idea to go in, and if you want to add some extra grain, you know, if you need to take off some ends, or if you want to make an end maybe that kind of got some more beat up, you can, you know, dig out some of this, scrape up some. If you want to do the tops or whatever, I wouldn't spend too much time weathering the other side, because that's going to get covered up with the car sheeting. If you find you like one side more than the other, be aware of which side you like and make sure that gets glued out whichever way you're doing this.